Hey there and welcome back to NBA 2K18's My League Mode. My name is Pete and today we complete another part of the 2019 NBA season with our expansion team, the Louisville Legionnaires. In the last episode we made our first trade of the season, shipping Mo Harkless off to New Orleans in exchange for Omar Ashik and the pick swap, and today we start things off with a matchup against the other expansion team in the league, the Las Vegas Aces. And I decided to play this one myself simply because I was interested to see how the Aces are progressing. So let's jump in and talk a bit about how the game went along. We started this game off extremely strong on defense, recording 6 steals and 3 blocks in the first quarter alone. However, at the end of that first quarter, the Aces were still ahead of us thanks to some stellar 3-point shooting. In that first quarter, rookie Bamba was the standout player for us, recording 8 points to go along with 5 rebounds and 2 blocks in only 10 minutes of action. In the second quarter then, the Aces were not really able to keep the shooting going, but we kept up the defensive pressure, and so behind great scoring performances from both Rashad, Vaughn and Kuzma, we went into halftime with a 7-point lead. And here you can also see the defensive effort on screen, 9 steals and 5 blocks at halftime. In the third quarter, the Aces came back, however, shooting 65% from the field, and so the Legionnaires have to enter quarter number 4 with a narrow 2-point deficit. In that final quarter, the game remained fairly even, and so with about 32 seconds left on the clock, the game is tied at 107 apiece. The Aces inbound the ball to Dwayne Dedmon in the corner, who then gives it over to Terry Rozier, and despite a few on-ball screens, Tyler Ulis somehow manages to stay in front of his man. The ball then goes to rookie Rui Hachimura, who despite a 68 overall rating currently starts for the Aces, and who drives to the basket in traffic and promptly gets blocked by Josh Richardson. So with the clock ticking down, we go the other way and do not take a timeout here. Instead, we quickly get the ball back to Tyler Ulis. Ulis drives, finds a wide open Rodney Hood behind the 3-point line. Hood gets the shot off in time, but the ball bounces off the rim and then eventually rolls off. And so the battle of the expansion teams heads into overtime in Las Vegas. And that overtime period is again very competitive, and so with about half a minute left we are once again tied. However, this final stretch of the game belonged solely to Rui Hachimura. First, the and-one slam in traffic, putting the Aces up by 2, and then the successful free throw to extend the lead to 3. On the other side, Hernan Gomez catches the ball in mid-range territory, and just a split second too late he sees the backdoor cut by Rodney Hood, which leads to the pass being picked off by none other than Hachimura. And down 3 with the shot clock turned off, we have no other choice but to foul, and even though Rozier misses the first shot, he hits the second one and gives the Aces a 2-possession lead. Out of the timeout, the ball goes to Rodney Hood, who eventually manages to score, but it's only a 2 and the game clock is not our friend in this situation. The Aces also take a timeout and then manage to burn a few valuable seconds before we once again foul Rozier, who once again heads to the line and this time he doesn't miss. Instead, he hits 2 of 2 and puts the nail in the coffin. And so an extremely competitive game in Las Vegas comes to a close with the Aces on top, who walk away happily with a 125-121 victory in overtime. Hachimura, by the way, was good throughout the entire game and not only in the last minute, finishing with a team-high 24 points to go along with 5 rebounds and 5 assists. On our side, Rodney Hood led all scorers with 25 points, 5 rebounds and 3 steals, shooting a not-so-efficient 11 of 25 from the field, which is right around his season average. Richardson follows with 18 points, although he only made 4 shots from the field, but he didn't miss a single one of his 8 free throws. Richardson also put in work on the defensive end with 2 steals and 2 blocks. Kuzma had 16 points, once again not overly efficient with 6 of 14 from the field, and he also added 3 steals on the other side of the basket. Bamba comes a bit late in the list, but might have been our best performer tonight. In a whopping 37 minutes of action, he put up 14 points, a career-high 17 rebounds, and another career-high 4 blocks. And I have to say, playing with him is just so much fun. The combination of length and mobility is just a joy to control, and I'm really excited to see where Bamba can develop within the next 1 or 2 seasons. Another guy that I quickly want to mention is Ulis, who also got himself a double-double with 10 points and 12 assists, and over the last few episodes I have to say I'm getting more and more comfortable with him as the starting point guard. Yes, his shooting efficiency is still not where it should be, but despite his size, Ulis is becoming a reliable finisher around the rim, and his speed in pushing the ball up court is an incredible advantage. His mid-range shot is also getting more and more lethal, with the ratings in the high 80s already, and after playing this game I think we will be able to turn him into a solid point guard after all. Whether or not he gets the starting job long term, that remains to be seen, but for now, considering that he is still only 23 years old, I like his progression. Here are now the full team stats for the matchup if you want to pause and have a look at them, and once again here the defensive effort has to be emphasized, as the Legionnaires rack up 14 steals and 10 blocks in this game. Speaking of defense, I think it is now high time for one of the more important contract extensions on the team, and of course I'm talking about our defensive anchor down low, Deyonta Davis. Even though Davis has been pushed out of the starting lineup by Bamba, he is still a vital part of our rotation, and his defensive presence, combined with his immense potential at only 22 years old, is worth a long-term extension in my opinion. Davis currently asks for about $6.9 million per year, but I'm willing to go a bit higher than that and offer him $7.5 million for the next 4 seasons, with a 5% increase every year. That should be a bit more fair because keep in mind we're not only paying Davis for his performance right now but also for his potential performance 2 or 3 years down the line, and for a guy who might end up being an 80 overall interior defender, a contract that eventually pays him about $8.5 million per year is more than adequate. And of course Davis happily accepts the offer, and with that we have one more player locked down long term. And while we're at it, let's immediately continue with another one, and I'm looking at Rashad Vaughn next. Vaughn is currently asking for about $6.5 million per year, but I hope to get him for a bit less than that. Now admittedly, Vaughn has won the backup spot at the shooting guard over Abrines, but at the moment his skill set doesn't really extend that far past his scoring abilities. While he is still more efficient than Abrines on the court, I think he could still show a bit more all-around presence, and for that reason I am a bit hesitant to go all out here. The offer will therefore be a flat $6 million for the next 2 years, including a team option for the 3rd year. I think this is still a contract that does Vaughn's performance over the last 1.5 years justice, but it is not as much of a long-term commitment as the 4-year contract for Davis, and therefore gives us a bit more flexibility. And Vaughn also accepts the offer, and so we now have the 2 most crucial contract extensions out of the way. Now, while we could also offer one for Ulis, he still has an incredibly cheap team option coming up, and I would rather take that and give him 1 more year to develop on a cheap deal instead of equipping him with a long-term contract immediately. With Cheick Diallo, I am a bit on the fence at the moment, as he hasn't really gotten many opportunities for playing time lately, but then again he is very quickly becoming an elite rebounder, and despite his size, a future role maybe a bit more focused at the power forward could be interesting for him. But of course, feel free to chime in here and let me know what you think. His price of about $5 million for the next 2 or 3 seasons is something that we can absolutely afford, so let me know if you think we should bring him back. With Abrines on the other hand, I think we will let his contract expire or move him before the deadline. We don't really need him as a 3rd shooting guard for the long-term future, and he is probably also not going to get that much better. With the 2 contract extensions in the book, this leaves us now with a projected salary cap for next season of about $54 million, however, as always not including team and player options. If we subtract Omer Asik's $12 million player option, which he is almost guaranteed to take, then we land closer to $42 million, and if we were to accept, let's say, the team options of Hernangomez, Johnson, Kuzma and Ulis, that would be an additional $10 million, leaving us with about $30 to $32 million going into the offseason. But I don't think we have to go much more into detail at this point. Instead, let's have a look at the next games, and we start things off with a close 198 victory against the Indiana Pacers. Rodney Hood leads the team in scoring with 20 points on a very efficient 7 of 12 shooting performance, while Hernangomez hits all 4 of his 3-point shots to finish the game with 14 points. And with that, Hernangomez's 3-point percentage is currently up to 43.9%, good enough to make him the 12th most efficient 3-point shooter in the league. We have to keep in mind though, he is shooting them at a rather low volume compared to the other guys around him. The next game then a decisive loss in LA against the Clippers, and sadly the loss isn't even our main concern in this one, as after only 16 minutes of playing time, Josh Richardson suffers a heavy injury. He leaves the game with a broken left leg and will now miss 6 to 8 weeks, so he might not be back until the end of March, maybe even the beginning of April, and the loss of our leading scorer and also one of our most excellent defenders certainly hurts the team a lot. His space in the starting lineup will now be taken by Rodney Hood, and all of you Kyle Kuzma fans also get something to cheer for, as Kuzma finally jumps into the starting lineup at the small forward. Rashad Vaughn gets a few more minutes as well to absorb Richardson's absence, and it's actually now a good thing that we didn't trade Abrines in the last episode, because he can now also step in with 14 minutes off the bench. Richardson in the meantime gets comfortable with the reserves, and I can only hope that he has a speedy recovery. Before we get back into the action, we then have a trade offer to look at, as the Las Vegas Aces once again look to move Serge Ibaka, this time in exchange for Jonathan Simmons and Bismack Biyombo of the Orlando Magic. And first and foremost, this trade is an excellent one for Orlando. Biyombo is currently only the third man in the center rotation, but has the biggest contract, and getting rid of that is something I imagine the Magic would like to do. Now, Simmons does have a comfortable place in the rotation off the bench behind Evan Fournier, but Mario Hezonja is right on his heels rating-wise and also 6 years younger. Still, Simmons is probably not a player they desperately want to get rid of, unless of course it allows them to fill the position where they have by far the biggest need. And as you can see here, with an expiring Channing Frye and Chris Bosh, who also somehow made the roster, and also after losing Aaron Gordon in free agency, the Magic are in dire need of someone who can start at the 4. The Aces, on the other hand, would get rid of a player with an enormously large contract, and while of course they do take on an equal sum in return, that sum is now split between 2 players, one of which, Jonathan Simmons, has a team option coming up. With Dwayne Dedmon expiring and Ibaka also gone in this move, Biyombo should likely find a spot for himself in the rotation, and that certainly puts him into a better spot compared to his situation in Orlando. The real asset for the Aces, however, is Jonathan Simmons, who is listed as a shooting guard and could also fill that spot, backing up JJ Redick, but he can also comfortably switch over to the small forward, where the Aces arguably have the biggest need right now. Despite his amazing game against us, Rui Hachimura is probably not starting caliber material just yet, and therefore the trade makes some sense for both sides. That is also the reason why we will have it go through, and with that the trading season slowly picks up steam. We then continue things with a loss in Chicago, where we lose to the Bulls 105-100, despite an almost perfect shooting performance from Rashad Vaughn, who finished the game with 17 points. From Chicago, we then travel to New York and lose again. This time we go down 107-93 against the Knicks, but once again in short succession, the loss isn't even the worst thing about this. Not even 1 week ago, Josh Richardson broke his leg, and now Yogi Ferrell is out for 4 to 6 weeks with a right hand fracture. And with that, not only do we lose another key rotation player, but we're also running incredibly thin at the guard positions. So thin in fact that with Briante Weber back in the G League, we have no one here to back up Tyler Ulis. So at this point I was more or less forced to make another roster move. And since we have no more roster spots available and I didn't want to simply release anyone, we now have to make another quick trade. And I think one of the guys that we can easily move here is Tyler Lydon. As far as I know, Lydon hasn't seen a single minute of action this season, and considering our personnel down low, he likely never will. So, looking for a team that might have some use for him, I stumbled upon the San Antonio Spurs. As you can see here, the Spurs rotation is extremely thin from the small forward down to the center spot, with a total of only 6 players for those 3 positions. At the same time, the Spurs have exactly what we need, a plethora of point guards. Now, my intended target here was rookie Lamar Peters, but sadly the Spurs were unwilling to move him, so instead we have to settle with Derrick White. White was a late first-round pick in 2017. At 6'5", he brings some solid size to the court, and his skill set is that of a solid shooter, a passable distributor, not a great defender but not a liability either, and lastly, an extremely athletic player with both speed and vertical ratings at 97. Now, I wanted to do a simple player swap here, but the Spurs wouldn't have it. Instead, they offer us this. For the 2 remaining second-round draft picks we own, the Spurs are willing to give us their 2019 first-rounder. Now, what might look a little bit lopsided in our favor here is actually not that big of an issue, because keep in mind this year's draft class is not that deep. At the same time, the Spurs are currently the 4th best team in the league, so chances are extremely high that this pick will fall very late in the first round. So the value we eventually get out of it on draft night is questionable at best, and so therefore it also won't be that big of a loss for the Spurs. For the same reasons, I'm also not too attached to the 2 second-rounders, and so I have no problem agreeing to this. And so, while Yogi Ferrell heals his injury with the reserves, the newest acquisition, Derrick White, immediately gets inserted into the rotation as the backup for Tyler Ulis. And because I wanted to experience his first game as a Legionnaire myself, I played the next game against the Knicks, although the story of that is quickly told. The most curious thing in this game was probably that the Knicks have decided to bring Carmelo Anthony off the bench, but he didn't seem to be fazed by that at all and scored a team-high 24 points in 18 minutes. Now, this game was definitely not a thing of beauty. Shooting percentages for both teams were not exactly stellar, and both teams barely managed to get above 40% at halftime. Rodney Hood was likely the biggest offender in that regard on our side. Yes, he did lead the team with 9 points at halftime, but I think he shot something like 3 of 13 at that point. We did, however, manage to turn it around in the second half behind strong performances from Kuzma and Vaughn, and also behind improved shooting from Hood, especially in the fourth quarter, and so the Legionnaires win in New York 104-96. The leading scorer of the night for us, Kyle Kuzma with 23 points to go along with 7 rebounds, followed closely by Hood's much less efficient 22 and Rashad Vaughn's 19 points in 18 minutes. The player of the game, however, was without a doubt Tyler Ulis, who not only scored a very efficient 16 points, but also dished out a franchise record 14 assists. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, he is slowly but steadily growing into that role as the starting point guard. Mohamed Bamba is another guy I quickly want to mention. Next to grabbing 13 rebounds, he also tied the franchise record for blocks in a single game with 5. Newcomer Derrick White, on the other hand, remained rather quiet in his 16 minutes of playing time, finishing the game with 2 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists and 2 turnovers. Now I think we can quickly get one more week of games behind us, starting off with the Boston Celtics. And despite being riddled by injuries and on the road, we win this one 101-97. Rodney Hood scores a team-high 19 points, followed by Kyle Kuzma with 18, and Kuzma also suffered a minor injury in this game. It was, however, only a sprained hand, and he was only listed as day-to-day after the game, so he will have to play through this one because we're also slowly running out of alternatives. From Boston, we travel to Toronto, where we suffer a heavy 21-point defeat against the Raptors, as Tyler Ulis leads the charge for the Legionnaires with 22 points. Mo Bamba recorded another double-double with 12 points and 12 rebounds, and despite his injury, Kyle Kuzma was able to add 9 points in the loss. For the next game against the Pistons, his injury had already healed again, and it also showed on the court, as not only do we defeat the Pistons 97-83, but Kuzma also bounced back big time with 17 points and 12 rebounds. Tyler Ulis also filled the stat sheet with 13 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists and 3 steals, and even though he once again had a poor shooting performance, Rodney Hood wasn't too bad either with 8 points, 6 rebounds and 10 assists. The fourth and final game of the week has us match up with Chicago again, and after a loss in the previous week, we turned things around this time and beat the Bulls 115-108. Tyler Ulis scored a season-high but not overly efficient 24 points to lead all scorers, while Rodney Hood added an equally inefficient 19. And so, despite all the injuries, we can wrap up this episode on a high note, winning 4 of the last 5 games and heading straight towards the trade deadline. That means we only have 5 more days to make moves, and while I'm not desperately looking to trade anyone after the 2 trades we had this season, please, as usual, do feel free to leave your ideas in the comments below. For those of you who are interested, I will also quickly display our player stats on screen in a moment, so you can either pause and dive into the numbers, or if you don't want to look at them, you can simply skip ahead a few seconds. Alright, and with that, I would say we have another interesting episode behind us. In the next one, we will definitely move past the trade deadline, we will very likely also have a look at the All-Star weekend, and then we're already about to enter the last stretch of the season. Until then, as always, leave a thumbs up if you like this episode, and of course, if you want to support the channel, then feel free to subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.